I'm Kent Myers.
I'm Mick Cornett, and it's time for the verdict.
As a part of its traditional and continuing commitment to public and community service, Crowe and Dunleavy Law Firm presents The Verdict, an objective discussion of contemporary legal issues hosted by Kent Myers. And also brought to you by a friend of Oklahoma Lawyers for Children and Delta Dental Plan of Oklahoma. And welcome to The Verdict. I'm Mick Cornett. As always, I'm joined by one of Oklahoma's top legal experts, Kent Myers. And Kent, we're taking an Oklahoma focus on the issue of predatory lending. First, what is it?
Well, predatory lending does need a little bit of a definition. There are really probably three types of lending in Oklahoma, generally speaking. Prime lending, which is the type of lending that is done for borrowers who have good credit, good collateral, good reasonable prospect of repayment. That's not involved in predatory lending. Then there is a category called subprime lending. Those are the people that have had credit problems, difficulties in the past, perhaps aren't quite as good a credit risk, perhaps not quite as much collateral. And those are the people that are marginal or less likely to be able to get a credit. That's where, in many instances, the predatory aspect of lending surfaces. Predatory lending is lending to people under really onerous, really difficult, overbearing circumstances. Very high interest rates, very strict default charges, and so in some cases, just out-and-out fraud in trying to steal the collateral from the borrower. Predatory lending is a subject that is going on, is being carried on, I should say, nationwide. There is legislation in a number of states, and we're going to be talking about the predatory lending problem, if any, in Oklahoma and what Oklahoma ought to do about it.
We're discussing predatory lending, and we'll meet our guests when we return. This is The Verdict with Mick Cornett and Kent Myers.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information.
I enrich our cultural landscape.
I help define our quality of life.
I am one of 4,000 artists in central Oklahoma who receive
support from Allied Arts, this community's united arts organization.
I am an allied artist.
In Oklahoma, there are more than 1,600 children waiting to be adopted. They're of all ages, and for many, home has been a source of pain and conflict. They've dreamed of finding a better life and a loving family. Consider adoption. For more information, call 1-877-OK-SWIFT or visit the website www.okdhs.org. Adopt. It may be the toughest job you'll ever love.
And Blankenship has stopped at the line of scrimmage. No gain on the play. Leaving it 4th and 7 on the Tiger 46-yard line. 38 seconds on the clock. The Tigers have no choice but to go. Wiggins had to do the kicking. Here's the snap. And the kick is away.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all of the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. Oklahoma Lawyers for Children has over 350 of the best attorneys and volunteers in Oklahoma County who donate their time and services to represent children. For more information, call 405-23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, who's going to introduce our special guests.
Very pleased today to have on my right Myrna Kay Smith, the Senior Vice President for Government Relations for the Oklahoma Bankers Association. Her first visit to The Verdict. Myrna Kay has lobbied both at the state and federal level on bankers' issues, and the Oklahoma Bankers Association, I understand, represents about 300 banks in Oklahoma. She has also worked in both the legislative and the executive branches of Oklahoma government and is a native of Oklahoma City. Myrna Kay, thank you for coming.
It's my pleasure.
Glad to have you. On my left is a return visitor to The Verdict, and we're very pleased to have the Honorable Opio Toure back for another session with us. Representative Toure is a lawyer. He is the representative of District 99 and has been since 1994. In the Oklahoma House of Representatives. He is the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, but also serves on the Commerce Committee, and he and his family are active in the church at St. Paul Baptist Church of Meridian. Representative Toure, welcome back.
Thank you for having us.
Well, today we're talking about the subject of predatory lending, and let me start with Myrna Kay Smith and ask what is predatory lending as you understand it?
It's sometimes difficult to define. A lot of times it's one of those things that you know it when you see it. It has taken on elements of fraud. It's not full disclosure of rates of the terms of the loan at all.
It's bad practice.
It is bad practice.
Are your banks doing it?
Absolutely not.
Representative Toure, you're the author of a bill that we're going to get to later on in the show and discuss more specifically, but how widespread is predatory lending in Oklahoma? Is it happening here?
It's happening here. I first became aware of it a couple of years ago when I was campaigning, walking my district and seeing a number of for sale signs in yards, especially among older people, and finding out how did they come to lose their homes. The American Association of Retired Persons has done a survey in Oklahoma which shows that there are problems here, and I've received numbers of letters from citizens who have been victims of predatory lending.
Now, I understand predatory lending, Myrna Kay, to be something different than subprime lending.
That's correct.
Predatory lending is just bad conduct, too high an interest rate, too restrictive default provisions, perhaps making loans when the purpose is to steal the collateral from the borrower. But that's not necessarily the same thing as subprime lending. What is subprime lending? Subprime
lending is for borrowers who have not squeaky clean credit. They've maybe have a bankruptcy, a charge-off in their history somewhere. Maybe they're slow pay.
Or maybe they haven't been around long enough to have a credit rating.
That's correct too. Yes, that's exactly right. Subprime lending is more risk-based pricing rather than in predatory lending.
There's
you
deception.
Could call absolutely deception, and it's more asset-based lending.
Well, Opio, as in the general population, who typically is victimized or who suffers most from predatory lending practices?
Right. The predominant victims of predatory lending are older folks, minorities, and some young people that are just getting started. It happens in the arena of subprime lending, and as Myrna Kay has said, it's not folks who are involved in subprime lending that are predatory lenders, but predatory lenders are involved in subprime lending. It's where you have high-cost loans far above the market interest rates, if you will, 8, 10, sometimes 12% above the Treasury rate. You have all types of abuses, which actually result in the person becoming upside down, owing more than what the asset is worth, and then eventually losing it because they can't pay the loan.
Well, Opio, if I saw a sign driving down the street that said loans, no collateral, you know, would that probably put off a light in my head that might be the type of place that predatory lending would take place?
That might, but you probably wouldn't even have to drive down the street. Folks will call you. They will send
Oh,
you
really?
letters saying you've qualified for $30,000. Just make this phone call, and you got $30,000. People will call.
So it's proactive then.
Yeah, it's very proactive, and I'm glad that Ken asked the question, because Oklahoma banks are not involved in this. Normally we have out-of-state lending financial institutions, but folks who are considered brokers in-state who go find the victims and then get the loan signed and sell the loan off to someone outside the state.
Yeah, let me ask about the banks and regulation of the banks, or regulation of lenders, maybe I'd better say. I know there is some fairly significant federal regulation of banking, and there, of course, is state regulation of banking. Are these predatory lenders regulated the same way that the traditional bank is regulated?
No, no, and I don't think even close to the way the banks are regulated and examined. The state chartered banks are regulated by the state banking department. National banks are regulated by the OCC, Office of the Comptroller. In addition to that, state chartered banks are also examined by FDIC for compliance.
Well, now,
so we have a lot of regulation, and there are financial institutions that are very lax as far as...
If the banks that are the members of the Oklahoma Bankers Association would start employing the practices that we know exist out there in the predatory area, would the existing regulators stop that?
Absolutely, absolutely. It would be a safety and soundness issue for the bank, and that would come under the compliance exam, which is a very thorough, and it has to do with the loan portfolio to deposit ratio.
Opio, you've introduced legislation in this session to regulate or severely restrict these predatory lending practices. What caused you to do that?
Well, again, my initial experience in walking my neighborhoods and seeing the number of people who are losing their homes because of predatory lending practices. I also went to several conferences. Well, I went to one conference where the issue came up, and then I had a number of folks who come to see me in my office, especially senior citizen advocates, saying this is a real big problem. We hope that you can do something about it.
Is it happening elsewhere besides Oklahoma?
Oh, of course, all over the country it's happening. It's a very big issue. I think the Federal Reserve Board has just recently passed legislation to beef up the federal regulations, but there are still enough loopholes that a minority person, a senior citizen, a young person can become a victim of predatory lending without even being asked, without even going out and ask for a loan. They can become a victim.
And you're trying to plug those loopholes.
We're trying the best we can.
Let me jump in here and get us to a break. We're discussing predatory lending. You're watching The Verdict.
A videotape cannot teach our children to swim. A video game cannot capture the warmth of a campfire. And no TV show nor movie can help a child reach out to make a friend. But a campfire camp can show kids a world of experience they've never known before. For at Campfire, life is not something to be watched, it's something to be lived. The first fire we light is the fire within. Campfire, boys and girls.
St. Gregory's University has been changing the lives of people like me for 125 years. Affordable, private Catholic education, balanced with dedication to community and service, makes St. Gregory special. We're extremely proud of our students' outstanding academic achievements and our nationally ranked athletic teams. It's when you help a student build a future of balance, integrity, and service that you change a life forever. St. Gregory's, a community for life.
Yesterday was plain awful.
You can say that
On Broadway is Oklahoma's premier youth musical theater company.
Bringing our daughter here was one of the smartest things we've ever done.
I've learned a lot. I've gained a lot of confidence. They helped me develop talents I never knew I had.
And it's fun.
On Broadway, Oklahoma's premier youth musical theater company. Now enrolling in Edmond. Call 330-CAST. That's 330-2278.
Every day, in state governments throughout the country, crucial decisions are being made that affect the lives of children and their families. But as this process takes place, children are often left voiceless. When these children raise their hands to be heard, is anyone listening? There are people listening. They are child advocates. Join us and raise your hand for kids.
Mick Cornett and Kent Myers back on The Verdict. We're discussing predatory lending. Kent, where are we here?
Let's talk with Representative Toure about his bill. You are the House author of House Bill 2144, the committee substitute on prohibiting predatory lending. Tell our viewers, if you will, what generally is encompassed by your bill.
Well, let me tell you very quickly that the bill, the committee substitute, was a result of a process in which mortgage bankers, mortgage brokers, consumer advocates work together to try to come up with some agreement in various areas which present problems for consumers. Three basic areas. One is how much does the loan cost, which is the interest rate, the things that can be charged, which actually bring up the balance. Secondly, is there an ability for the consumer to get out of a loan without having to pay a penalty, what we call prepayment penalties? Mm-hmm. And third, can a mortgage broker continually go back to the consumer and get the consumer to refinance? We call that loan flipping. And so those are the three broad areas we tried to attack in the bill. We wanted to make sure that the interest rate was not unyielding. Some interest rates can, we find, as much as 17, 18%. And the Treasury yield should not be more than 8% in our opinion. The loan should not be more than 8% above the Treasury yield. Mm-hmm. There should not be a repayment penalty. If you find yourself 2 years down the road and you can pay off this loan, you shouldn't have to pay 2 or 3 years worth of interest in order to get out the loan. And thirdly, if you have no difficulties, no one should be able to call you or keep calling you and saying, you need more money, you need another loan. You just got this loan 6 months, but you need another $2,000. So before you know it, you have more in the loan than you do in your house.
Well, let me ask a question of Myrna Kay Smith from the Oklahoma Bankers Association. We have just gone through, or perhaps are still in, a period of some of the lowest loan rates that we have seen in many, many years. And it wasn't unusual, or isn't unusual at all, for homeowners to take an existing loan and to refinance it to get a lower interest rate to take advantage of that market situation. That's different than flipping, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Well, can you explain to our viewers what the difference is and what flipping is as you understand it?
I'd like to have Opio answer that question on flipping,
well,
if we can do that, because it gets
Oklahoma
at the
banks
heart.
are not doing this.
Yeah.
Now, I want to make that clear. Oklahoma banks are not doing as far as that information. Loan flipping generally occurs instead of refinancing to get a lower interest rate. The consumer comes out with a higher interest rate, owing more, more fees.
It's
more
the opposite of typical refinance.
Right, it's just the opposite, and there's no reason for them to finance. The consumer is basically berated by a lender saying that we need to give you more money, get more money, and the folks who are targeted are generally folks who have lower incomes, such as senior citizens, such as low-income folks, and they do have emergencies and so forth. So they're told that you can get more money on your house, and then they end up owing more. Instead of having $10,000 in equity and getting an $8,000 loan, they get a $15,000 loan. They don't have any equity anymore. So that's basically the problem.
Well, thank you. Myrna Kay, typically in the bank lending situation, the bank takes collateral as protection, but the bank isn't really interested ultimately in acquiring that collateral and in owning that collateral. That's kind of a last resort. It's my understanding that in the predatory lending situation, that may be the prime motive for the lender, is to get the collateral because of an anticipated default.
It is. That's how they make their money. Is they take the home, and strip the equity out of it, and they go on down the road. On the other hand, you know, in contrast, a banker makes the loan, with the expectation that it's going to be repaid, and in a perfect world, it'll be repaid in a very timely manner.
Well, let me ask you another question. This web, or net, I should say, of this bill has been thrown out. I've looked through the bill. It's pretty lengthy and, to some extent, to me, complicated. Has it just covered the predatory lenders, or has the net of Opio's bill gone perhaps wider and covered more institutions such as the banks?
We do agree with the concept of Opio's bill. We want to get the predatory lenders to cease to exist in Oklahoma too, because it gives all of us a bad name. There's no industry in the country more heavily regulated than the banking industry, which is not just banks. It's the savings and loans, the credit unions. This is one area where we stand with the credit unions, and we agree on this one subject, which is a very rare thing.
Yeah, that may be unique.
That's true. We don't want to be painted with that same brush. We're so heavily regulated, no examiner, federally or state, is going to let a bank get away with any kind of even a hint of a predatory loan. It's a safety and soundness issue for us, and there are very severe penalties.
Well, let me ask real quickly, ask Opio a question. If this bill passes in its current form, will we have to have new regulators? Will there have to be an additional bureaucracy created to enforce this bill?
Hopefully not. We think that it can be regulated in our present regulators. And the bill probably wouldn't pass in its form that it is right now. There are still issues that have to be worked out among the parties involved. We want to make sure that we don't shut down subprime lending in Oklahoma. We don't want to put the good guys out of business, but we do want to get the bad guys.
Good.
Let me jump in here. Opio, give me a 30-second summation on your feelings on this subject of predatory lending.
Well, it's a shame when folks work as hard as they do all their lives to buy a piece of property, buy a home, and then lose it because of unscrupulous behavior by lenders, and we have to do something about it.
Okay. Myrna Kay?
We would prefer to be taken, we offered a committee substitute to be taken out of the bill in its present form because we do it right to begin with.
Do you think the banks are being caught up in this web of this particular regulation and perhaps should not be?
Exactly.
And we thank you both for coming by.
Yes, thank you.
I think our viewers have probably learned a lot. I know I have on the subject of predatory lending. Kent and I'll be back. We'll have a few final thoughts when we return. This is The Verdict.
Hello, my name is Ted Smith. I'm president of the board of directors of the Oklahoma Disability Law Center. ODLC provides free legal services in civil matters to people with physical and mental disabilities.
I'm Mike Sykes, vice president of ODLC. For more information, call 1-800-880-7755.
The Oklahoma Disability Law Center provides high-quality legal services to people with physical and mental disabilities.
Boy Scouts of America, where above all else, character counts.
Bringing out the best in each student. That is the simple goal and tradition of Heritage Hall. The focus on the individual shapes the educational experience at Heritage Hall. Each student benefits from small classes, able, dedicated teachers, a solid academic curriculum, and exceptional co-curricular programs of athletics, arts, community service, and other activities, parental involvement, personalized counseling, and the development of responsibility, integrity, and love of learning. If you want education taught with pride, then you want Heritage Hall.
We are back to wrap up another edition of The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. And Kent, you have some final thoughts?
Yeah, some rambling thoughts, not particularly focused on anything, but those who know me well realize that's a normal situation for me. One thing that occurred to me is that this is called, what we're talking about today is predatory lending, and how interesting titles of bills are.
Oh, yeah.
They are always titled in a way that would make it very hard to explain why you voted against it. I mean, who would be against predatory lending?
Sounds awful.
It does sound awful, but that's pretty inventive, you know, for legislators to title their bills in ways that you just can't dispute. Oftentimes, however, what's in the detail of the bill may not be quite as...
You know, Kent, and you being an attorney, you know, I don't know how many times a month or a week I'm asked to sign something and I'm not reading it all.
Yes.
And I mean, this is just a small part of it, and most of the times I'm doing it, it's with a reputable company. I'm not trying to lump all that in together. But that's a problem for the average person to have to sign something knowing they don't know what's in it.
Well, that's true. And you go to close a home loan, for instance, and there will be a stack of documents to sign this high, and you're invited to read them all, you're encouraged to read them all, but if you do, you'll be there weeks getting that loan closed.
And you won't understand it anyway.
But the nice thing about it is the reputable lenders, by and large, I know some people might dispute some of this, but by and large, they are absolutely trustworthy, and if they tell you something says something, it probably does, and you can do it. It's where you adopt that same view of trust and confidence in lenders that are not reputable that you get into trouble.
And I want to wish us happy birthday.
Happy birthday. We are approaching, as this show will air, we're approaching our first birthday. We've been on the air with this show since April of last year, and we're doing, I guess, our 52nd show or thereabouts now, and hopefully we'll have many more. I would really be interested in our viewers giving us some feedback on issues that you would like to see us cover. We try to get topical issues that are on the front burner for Oklahomans in both Oklahoma City and Tulsa, where our audiences are located. But we'd really like to hear from you. Be proactive. Get on that computer and tell us what you'd like to see.
The website address is theverdict.tv. There you see it. Hey, thanks to our guests for this show, State Representative Opio Toure and Myrna Kay Smith. For Kent Myers, I'm Mick Cornett. We'll see you next time on The Verdict. This program was brought to you by Crow and Dunlevy, a professional corporation. And also brought to you by a friend of Oklahoma Lawyers for Children and Delta Dental Plan of Oklahoma.